This is Passepartout, People and Places, brought to you by Jules Verne, taking you around the world, sharing memories and introducing you to the people at the heart of everything we do. I'm Abby, and in this series I'll be delving into past adventures, inside stories, future journeys, inspiring you to discover the wonders of the world. This latest episode of Passepartout, People and Places is all about Tanzania. Tanzania is breathtakingly beautiful. It boasts the highest concentration of wildlife in the world, but it's not all about the wildlife. The people are what make Tanzania so great. And I am beyond excited to be joined on this episode by David, founder of Tent with a View, our partners in Tanzania. David is going to talk about his years of experience in Tanzania, but not just his family's and his friends that he's met along the way. So sit back, relax, and let us take you to Tanzania. Hello, David.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us in London today.
My pleasure on a lovely sunny morning.
I know, it's unusual for London, isn't it?
Well, not unusual for me to be in London. So
That's very
I
true.
assume it's like this all the time.
No, unfortunately not. Very, very different to Tanzania. So today's episode is all about Tanzania. You are one of our partners in Tanzania. You escort our customers on one of probably my favourite itineraries. But one thing I wanted to share with you might have already seen this, is a customer sent us in a review from the last time they travelled with you. So it was the first time they've travelled with you, not the first time they've travelled with Jules Verne, but I'm going to read it to you. I don't know if you've heard this. Have you?
Well, I did have a sneaky little idea because somebody rang me from the UK in Tanzania and said, "Wow, you got to see this thing."
I mean, I'll read you the review and then we can talk about it afterwards, because I think it's probably one of the best reviews I've seen. And I promise it's not staged. It's a real review, is it not?
We hope so.
Okay, so this customer has said, "I have travelled on many occasions with Jules Verne and never been disappointed. This time, however, you exceeded my every expectation. Your partner in Tanzania, Tent with a View, deserves 12 out of 10. What a company. They made sure that our experience was unbelievable from start to finish. Great places to stay. Can't call them hotels as they were so much more than that. Welcoming, friendly staff with a huge knowledge who shared with us their animals, their culture, and their way of life. Surprises at every turn, including awesome food, yes, in the middle of the Serengeti, and care. They cared for us as friends, and we left feeling that warmth. Thank you, Jules Verne, for finding such an amazing travel partner. Everything was perfect from start to finish."
Wow.
What a review.
No, I mean, that is unbelievable. That's it. I tell you what, that is what makes it all worthwhile. Genuinely, when you read something like that,
Yeah.
you just feel $1 million. Whatever else, whatever other motives there are to do something like this,
Yeah.
things like that make you feel great. We prefer 14s out of 10. I'll just say that.
I mean, yes,
Obviously,
of course.
13s are dodgy, but 14s.
I mean, even just reading it is emotional. You can feel the emotion behind that review. And the fact that this customer has travelled with us many times before, but this is, probably their most heartfelt review, I think is just testament to what you do at Tent with a View.
Well, I met the group. I happened to be there. I arrived when they were ensconced, or they just arrived. They were all settled around the fireplace. And it was really lovely because I got out of the car and obviously they just assumed I was another client from another group or something that had turned up. And I suspect the very lady started talking to me and talking about how great the trip was. And then when I told her who I was, she went, "Oh, this is yours." And of course it was all like the Bush Rover,
Yes.
and it's a brilliant feeling. It's so good. You put so much work into making these things a little bit ingenious, a little bit different.
Yeah.
And when somebody responds like that, it's magic.
It is. So let's talk about the Bush Rover. So to me, the thing that I always go to with the Bush Rover and show people is that it's got a bath. So explain to our listeners, what is a Bush Rover? Why did you decide to invest in this, for your company? And just Yeah, explain what a Bush Rover is.
Well, if you forgive me my South African accent, and sorry for all those South Africans that are now going to feel embarrassed, but what happened was quite a while ago, around about the time when apartheid finished, suddenly Africa opened up to South Africans. So lots of people came up, and they were the first people that started to put roofs on the, on the top of their car, sorry, tents on the top of their car. And so there was cars streaming up from southern Africa into Tanzania, and we got, frankly, sort of slightly irritated because they'd all come and go, "Oh, stay in your car park, I don't want to pay for the tent," and so and put the tent up, and we said, "Look, it's a lodge, da, da, da." So I thought, right, and it sort of got under my skin, all these people coming with these little tents on top of the car.
Of course.
So we said, Massa and I said to Masudi, right, we're going to make our own version of a rooftop tent, and it's going to have a bath in it, and it's going to have a flushing loo in it.
Yes.
And so the flushing loo went in the passenger seat. And the funniest bit about that is when the team go out to drive the Bush Rovers into situ, one guy has to sit on the loo all the way, which of course elevates him. So he's creaked and he's got his head crushed against the roof while he's driving. But the bath in the back was the key thing. And of course, whenever you showcase one, we do have one in the UK that occasionally goes out and about. And the first thing, the reaction. As soon as somebody goes round the back, they go, I've got a bath in the back.
It's the first thing. Honestly, every time I'm lucky enough to go out and about and visit our travel agent partners, it's probably one of the first tours I go to because it captures their attention. Because I'm like, look at this beautiful Bush Rover. You are in the middle of the wildlife. Da da da. But would you like a bubble bath? And then I show them the bath. And honestly, it's my go-to wow factor. There's certain tours that I think I pick out certain things to capture people's attention, and that is one of them.
Of course, we do. Look, it's fun. Obviously, the idea is it puts a smile on people's faces.
Yeah.
It is a driving Land Rover. Important to people not to know that you don't drive in it. It's driven by a team put in situ for a period wherever the migration happens to be at that time, the wildebeest migration. So you don't drive in it, but everybody, of course, sneaks a chance to sit in the driver's seat at some point while they're staying in the room to get the photo.
Has to be done.
And of course, it means we have to tell the guys, please tidy up the driver's seat, because officially it's actually partitioned off from the passenger seat, which is the toilet.
Of course.
So you have to go outside and round the back of the awning to get into the driver's seat. And of course, all the mechanics usually just leave their spanners lying around on the floor. So you have to tidy it up because everyone's going to sneak in. But apart from the obvious fun factor, it's actually ridiculously comfortable. I mean, it's got a very fancy power system in it, so that it's got a shower as well, a stand-up shower within the awning, and and that is a powerful shower. It's got a good system there, So you have got the bath in the back. Probably everyone would like one bath just because you giggle as you're sitting in a bath in the middle of the Serengeti, in the back of a Land Rover. But the shower is a very practical thing at the side, And probably the best bit about it in reality is the height, because you're going up these stairs and you're sitting, it's probably a good 12 feet up, your feet are 12 feet up in the air when you're in the room. And you've even got, so up there, you can sneak out onto the balcony, and it can sometimes just be surrounded with wildebeest. Now, you could never do that on ground level. You could never go out, your own danger, but more especially you'd frighten all the wildlife off. But you can sneak out onto your balcony and enjoy all this stuff around, which is magic. And sometimes, if some areas, wildlife will come, lions will walk right past the front of the room and you can sit outside.
I think it's a really unique selling point, and I think it's a highlight of the tour, but you don't stay in them every night, do you? It's only sort of...
No, that's too... I mean, you've got a great chance to pass through all the northern parts of Tanzania, passing through some of the big names from Lake Manyara and Ngorongoro Crater, of course, through into the Serengeti, and then finishing at Lake Victoria, which again is sort of fantastic name. And the beauty there is you then suddenly get to out on foot and on canoes, and you cruise across the lake from a village where there's a beautiful, beautiful experience with a fish market. There's this one village is where all the fishermen come in. It's not just the fish market for that village.
Yeah.
Tens of different boats come in off the lake, and the fishermen from all over the area sleep there, bring in their catch, and it's so vibrant and it's such a wonderful spectacle, and it's one of the, sometimes the danger with cultural experiences in developing nations are that either it's a bit too raw and you actually feel slightly afraid or slightly distanced, or it's a bit too oriented towards you and you start thinking people are selling you things. This is in that perfect position where you are welcomed in but you are just an observer. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a super thing. So I think that's a really important addition to obviously the magnificent safari, where
Yes.
you're going to see a huge amount of game.
What you do very well, in my opinion, is show real life, not set up life, but real life and real sort of culture within Tanzania.
I think it's a massively important thing. I think if you've got a hotel somewhere in Europe, you want your team, your waiters to be kind of perfect ghost that just slides by and offers just meticulous service. I think it's really important in a place like Tanzania to bridge the cultural divide. Because what you reckon, the longer I do this, the more I realize how many people want to engage. They love the idea that they can connect. It's a bit male oriented, but a classic example would be that, like all over Africa, everybody watches the football. So, and it shocks people. You got someone, maybe the guy who cleans the rooms, who's only got 12 words of English, but he can name the entire Arsenal team from back to front. And it sort of creates a silly little connection, but a nice connection.
Definitely.
But the point is, then you get to the guys that run the restaurant and the guides, and they really connect, and their personalities. And what I love best on so many reviews from people visiting us is that they talk about the people. Oh, we had such a great time with Tino. He's brilliant. We got this Tino-tastic cocktail. It was amazing, and this kind of stuff. And that's wonderful, because that really does help to bridge the big gap that exists, I think, between the continents.
Definitely. And do you think that, obviously you are going to Tanzania and you're setting up the Bush Rovers, but you're staying in camps and you're staying in hotels. But do you feel that the way you do things is sustainable?
Well, that's obviously a hard thing to maintain.
Yeah.
It's very much what we try to maintain. And we've got to be, careful we don't get condescending about it, in the sense that you want people to have better lives. And you want to encourage that. You want to encourage their traditions, but you want to encourage them to have better lives. And it's a difficult one, because we would all prefer everyone to have their beautiful thatched huts.
Yeah.
Because they look amazing. But in the rainy season, the roof falls off, and they have to build it again. So everybody wants a tin roof, and you understand that, and you've got to go with that. And so it's a balance between encouraging people to be proud of their culture, and then supporting that cultural, that continuation of the culture, while at the same time perhaps realizing the realities that, a growing population in Tanzania, for instance, that you can't keep herding cattle if you're Maasai. Some people are going to have to do other things. Some will herd them cattle, but some will have to do other things. So it's always a delicate balance, but at the same time, so we're always trying to keep that balance alive while offering more and more opportunities. There's still a lot of people in rural communities that don't have opportunities, and so a big piece of what we do is trying to encourage that as well.
So you just touched on Maasai there. So tell me about Maasai.
Well, we've got the company is full of Maasai guys. They're pastoralists originally from the Nile area. They came down from the Nile. All these pastoralists, lots of pastoralist tribes, the Maasai being the most famous. And of course, they're very proud. And it's lovely that even the Tanzanian, there are well over 100 tribes in Tanzania, but even the Tanzanian people kind of love the Maasai and the fact that they maintain their traditional garb and so on. For instance, no one else would wear anything other than the company uniform each day. But all the Maasai guys, whether they're a waiter or whether they're a manager, just tip up in their full Maasai robes any particular day, and everyone just goes, "Wow, great, you can do that!"
Yeah, that's fine. It's loud,
and that's their thing, and that's what's brilliant. They've maintained that. They're very proud of it, and everybody else is very proud of it.
And I think you said, so there's over 100 different cultural tribes in Tanzania, but I think everyone's mind does go to the Maasai tribe, does it not?
Well, it's obviously because of that.
Yes.
It's the most evocative, isn't it? The most it sort of evokes a lot of good feeling. There's battles, I could go into deeper things about there are issues with pastoralists, and farmers and things that aren't always perfect, but the world isn't perfect. And
not.
Them maintaining their culture is a wonderful kind of centerpiece, definitely, for us to focus around. And obviously, when you go through Ngorongoro, for instance, one of the beauties of that is you drive, if you go into the crater, and of course it's a 27-kilometer wide sunken volcano.
Yeah.
And even when you hit the rim, you just go, wow.
Yeah.
And then you drop in, and obviously it's full of wildlife, a lot of it that doesn't get out. So there's very interesting issues like inbreeding with lions and things, because they don't actually mix enough. And so there's a lot of interesting dynamics around the crater in itself, but it's a phenomenal place for wildlife. But all around it in the wider Ngorongoro is called the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. So the crater is one piece of the much wider conservation area. All around the conservation area, Maasai live. So it's not actually a national park. Everywhere, all the other places are national parks.
Right.
The Ngorongoro has its own authority because the Maasai are allowed to still live in it.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing when you go through Ngorongoro is that, you know, you will see a herd of giraffe and a herd of wildebeest and a herd of zebra, and then a guy in a red robe and a spear walking through with his sheep and his goats in the middle of them, you know, and that's fascinating in itself. And that's a dynamic that's existed for a long time.
Yeah.
That we'd like to be able to maintain.
So do you still get wowed after all this time?
No, every day. I mean, it's, you know, I'm positively boring because when when I'm not doing my job, I do it for fun, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go to other places in Africa, or because I go seeing bears in Slovakia, whatever the other things. Even if I'm in the Lake District, or we're going to play some Mull, I'll just go watching otters in Mull. I love wildlife, but I love Tanzania because it's fragile. It's, you know, we think where we are now in the world and the issues of climate and you know, land use patterns and the shrinking wild world we have.
Yeah.
You know, I would like to put this one in, you know, very few people would know that only 4% of mammals on the planet are wild.
Oh, wow.
96 are us and our livestock.
Gosh.
Certainly in terms of weight and biomass. So, you know, these are stats. It's so important we protect these areas.
Yes.
And so there's more to it in Tanzania. It's phenomenal. It's one of the last great countries. I mean, these vast areas given over to wildlife protection. And it's really important we acknowledge it and look after it.
So on that sort of a theme, tell me a little bit about the thought process behind your conservation departure. So it follows the same route as your, not normal, because your tours aren't normal, they're amazing, but it follows the same route, am I right?
It's the same trip, but at the end, I mean, these days, I think as an extension on the normal trip, you can now go to Sudani. Sudani is a national park on the coast.
Yeah.
It's a small national park. Well, by Tanzanian standards, it's still 1,100 square kilometres.
So not that small.
Yeah. But in some of the, you know, for instance, you know, Nyerere National Park in the south is bigger than Switzerland.
Yeah.
The Serengeti, you know, these are enormous places. But still, it's quite isolated because north of it is large communities. South of it, Dar es Salaam, Bagamoyo, large community. Obviously, got the coast on one side. But it's a unique ecosystem, and there are traditionally a lot of major corridors for wildlife to move from it out to the other parks. And of course, these corridors are under threat as populations grow.
Yeah.
So it's a great focus for that. And so a lot of the issues that you have in the conservation world, everything from, you know, shrinking areas for wildlife to move, the disappearing corridors which they need to connect for certain types of food they need occasionally, for males to spread to breed. Males usually have far bigger territories, and so male elephants, for instance, will move from park to park.
Yeah.
And these kind of things, all those things, there's a strong dynamic, there's deforestation, you know, over-pastoralism. That's one of the issues that, you know, we don't want to talk about Maasai, but unfortunately there's too many cows and they go into these areas. So it has a lot of those things around the fringes of it. So we have our own research centre, which is going to become a UN Global Goals Centre. So it's going to move to even wider things, which I'm very excited about. But it's a kind of microcosm for just about everything you could think of. It's almost like Save Sudani, Save the Planet message in some ways. So we've made it the centrepiece and researched turtles. We've got a big marine environment. There's a turtle breeding beach there. So there's a marine park. We've got lion projects. We've introduced zebra and impala. We've obviously had our big elephant projects over the years. And now we've got these big community projects, which are going to come under the UN banner.
So talk to me about the migration then. So that's what most people think of when they go into Tanzania. I'm going to see the Great Migration. But why would you go to Tanzania to see it on the Tanzania side?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that one, because there's really only one side where you can
that's it.
Because it takes me back to this whole idea that Tanzania as a country is hidden in the shadows while its component parts are super famous. It's bursting with fabled destinations that loads of people have heard of. While if you stopped 100 people in the street and asked them where Tanzania was, a good number couldn't tell you.
No.
But if you ask them, have you ever heard of the Serengeti, almost everyone would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then a sizable number would say, "Oh, it's in Kenya," or "I don't know, it's
Yeah.
somewhere else." But you told me it's in Tanzania. A lot would go, "Where?" And that can apply to Zanzibar, saying that, a lot of people wouldn't know that Tanzania is Tanganyika and Zanzibar. So it's in the name. And having Ngorongoro Crater, Lake Victoria, the second largest expanse of fresh water on the planet, Lake Tanganyika, which is so deep that it's 17% of the world's fresh water.
Gosh.
Huge parks all over beyond these ones that people have never heard of. It's a phenomenal destination that is hidden in its own name. And so, and Kenya's milked that for years. Well done, Kenya. They've done well for it. But
It's our time now, though. Tanzania's time now.
It's our time to let everyone know the reality. So, moving to the migration.
Yes.
So, the first important thing is it's 365 days a year. Again,
Yes.
a Kenyan phenomenon, because people go in July and August in Kenya and say that's when the migration is. And they would perpetuate that notion, of course, because that's when it's in Kenya. But for the entire year it's in Tanzania, and for those 2 months it's shared with the tiny pimple on the top of the Serengeti called the Masai Mara. He says very cynically, but it's, genuinely speaking, you can visit the migration at any time of year, and it's still possible to see it virtually on your own, particularly when it's in the south. So December to March, we think on those horrible, cold, wet, miserable nights in England, it is superb down in the south.
Yeah.
You've got the Bush Rovers in a brilliant place in the middle of nowhere, 7 kilometres from the nearest other camp. So the only roads are our roads
Yes.
to get to and from the camp. And it's full of wildebeest through that time. And they drop their young, which is a magic touch. February is when they all have their young.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant time to be down there. So that's still a point where you can actually see huge herds on your own.
And what's the sound like? What does it? Is it just because I can imagine it's just this roar coming through of just sounds of animals and going fast. What is it?
Actually, you see, that's a wonderful evocation, because the reality is you're going to giggle your head off now, because the reality is you wake up and you hear.
I mean,
and
wow.
Stuck in your head is just this constant. Even when you're out on game drive, you turn the car off, all around you. And then suddenly, in the middle of the night, you're just listening to this, you're probably half asleep, and then suddenly there's and the huge herd just comes pouring past the Bush Rovers, and obviously being chased by something. And so obviously that's a magic sound. I always thought that safaris would be the perfect trip for someone who's blind, because probably the most evocative point is when it's dark and all the sounds are at their greatest.
I mean, even just I used to live in Zimbabwe, and I remember just the sounds of nights of sort of the crickets going. But even that on safari, all of a sudden it goes quiet, and then you hear, like you said, and it just the noise erupts. I mean, I do remember previous safari sort of sitting there thinking, what was that noise? What was that noise? What was that noise? Because you are sort of aware. But when you're in the Bush Rovers, like you said, because you're on top and you're above everything, you can sit on your balcony. You don't need to be like, what's going on? You can just listen to the sounds from the safety of your bubble bath or your balcony.
Yes, well, it's funny because you know the reality is, especially if someone's not used to it, they'll be checking the gap between the bottom of the awning and the floor on the bottom, and wondering how easy it is to climb the stairs if you're a lion, and how secure the canvas door is. But no, of course, the reality is you want that adrenaline.
Yeah.
Because you will have all through the migration season. We've just left the Grumeti area, a couple of weeks ago, and moved up north to the Mara area.
Yeah.
And all the way through, there was a lion pride that had just had some cubs. So they stayed within a few hundred meters of them, and they were in the bush right behind the room. So every night they were calling so close, and if you think you can hear a lion's call at 5 miles away, you can imagine what it's like at 300 meters away.
Gosh.
And they would come out in the middle of the night and walk through underneath the bandas, and the males would roar. And and that is it vibrates in your chest. It's that powerful.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the magic moments.
And then, so we've talked about the sounds and things, but also when you're in the middle of these camps, like you said, where there are no roads around you, you know, the nearest roads are miles and miles away. When you look up, the stars must be incredible because there's no light pollution.
Well, I mean, obviously, that's a really good point. When you've got a moon, it's incredible what you can see. So when you're in these areas with no artificial light pollution, the first thing is, so if there's a strong moon, the shadows are unbelievable, and how far you can see is unbelievable.
Never thought of that, actually.
Yeah, well, that's the other way. That's the other side of it. You just
Yeah.
cannot believe the size of the shadow as you walk around. But obviously, then that obscures the star. But when there's no moon, the moon's gone. Obviously, the stars are incredible. I mean, the blanket of stars, you know, just this vast Milky Way and millions of stars over your head.
Just feels out of this world, doesn't it? It just being surrounded by wildlife and true wildlife. And that's the one thing that I think, obviously I'm a little bit biased, Jules Verne is our company, but the one thing I love about us is we go to some of the last truly wild places on earth. It's not everyday norm. I mean, I know it's everyday norm for you, but even you still get wowed by it.
No, of course I do. It's sort of like, you know, it's my yoga to be out in that. You know, it's I just sitting on a rock in that environment or something by yourself is just the most beautiful experience. And I think that no one can go somewhere like that and not be profoundly moved while they're there. Obviously, vast majority of people get home and you're back to normal life, and this is annoying you, and that's whatever, and it's all gone. But while you're there, I don't think I've ever met anyone that doesn't feel some profound connection with nature when they're in a place like that. You know, it puts you in touch. I mean, sometimes, you know, we went to Sudan, so you talk about the conservation trip. You know, it was great because people maybe been nervous about certain things, you know, as you get to know the nature. And in the end, I had them walking across the salt flats at Sudan following lion prints. You know, let's see if we can find them, right? You know,
so we're not going on a bear hunt, we're going on a lion hunt.
Exactly. You know, and it's thrilling for everybody.
It's just truly amazing, isn't it? And I think, oh God, it just makes me want to go tomorrow. Should we just go? Let's stop the podcast now and head out there and go looking for lions and zebras and giraffe and just everything.
I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Well, yeah, looking forward to the next group. We've got one in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it won't be long. So just to sort of touch on the people element, why has that always been at the forefront of your mind? Why has it always been so important that you have the very best rangers and guides? And
well, I think the key is to nurture the best Tanzanians, to get the best out of the people, and to sort of give them the opportunity is massive. And you know, my second day ever in Tanzania, I met Masudi, who's my partner in the business and my best mate. And you know, and that's a wonderful thing to have. People have business partners for convenience and so on. But you know, this is a massive friendship, and the company's grown through the families. Basically, it's family. You know, it's two of his brothers are running camps. His daughter is the accountant. You know, they're all coming through the treadmill, and it's like cousins and nephews and nieces, and everybody's in different parts. And
similar from your side as well, though. You're a family on, you know,
well,
this
we're
side.
hoping to get Lily. So, you know, our daughter Lily adopted from Mwanza. Every year she goes back. She goes and visits the home, tries to help for a day, a little bit in the home where she came from, which is super to keep that connection. But obviously, you know, getting into, I had her driving the Land Rover earlier this year.
Did you?
Yeah, just in first gear, just around a big field.
So
but
start them young.
She didn't kill any hippos or anything.
Well, that's good.
But no, but you know, nurturing her in that, because obviously I'd love her to take over as well.
Of course.
And I would hope she would, because you know it's so important for us to offer the opportunities and build the teams, and it's, you know, the longevity is great.
I think it's amazing though that, you know, she regularly gets to go back and visit Tanzania, and you have such a love for Tanzania. Both yourself and your partner Tara, you have this amazing love for the destination and the people, and I think it's amazing that she's got that at home. It's just,
well, it is, but it's home there. I mean, there is no difference.
No.
Being in Tanzania is home. It's exactly the same. It's, you know, the office is, you know, it's just an extended group of family basically, and that is imagined, because that's the other thing. I think, you know, if you don't know that, you might be an assumption. You know, there's not very many positive images shown of Africa, are there? So a lot of people have there's some kind of innate fear of what's going to meet them on the ground, and that's why everyone's always shocked at just you meet a wonderful bunch of incredibly friendly people who actually, they very rarely say anything naughty about each other. Because people always assume in Swahili, they hear Swahili, they think they're saying something naughty about the clients, and they never do. They
No.
never say anything. They're just so kind and gentle as a nation.
So the safari element of visiting Tanzania, how does that work? So explain to someone who's never been on a safari before, sort of, it's the adrenaline. I mean, the adrenaline's huge when you're sort of racing through looking for things, but how
We never race, dear. We never race.
never race, very, very slow. But how do you sort of explain to somebody who maybe has arrived, it's their first time doing a safari, what is the norm? How do you spot things? What's the plan?
Well, different destinations have different feel to them. So if you are, you go into Lake Manyara, and it's quite, it's actually two interesting things because it's quite heavily wooded.
Okay.
So a lot of you drive, there's a big escarpment and you're driving through woodland. So obviously it's quite intense. So things have to be close by. And so they made a play of saying we're famous for the tree climbing lions, which is a fantastic marketing ploy, but lions climb trees,
Yeah.
wherever you are, lions climb trees. But they made it their slogan and people go, oh, the tree climbing lions of Manyara. But the reason they might say that, of course, is because it's quite intense experience because you're in the trees and so everything has to happen close by. But then you hit the lake.
Yeah.
So obviously Lake Manyara, you then come out and it's this big open sort of soda flat with flamingos and so on. And great bird life. And then obviously a much more open view. So then you see herds of things, whether it be zebra or waterbuck, so there are different experiences in each park. And obviously Serengeti is vast and
Yes.
and it's built around, it's the savannas of Africa in reality of the Serengeti.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, you get this thing of, because the Serengeti is so famous and so well used for documentaries,
Yeah.
people sort of assume that Africa is a great big savanna. It's
Yeah.
75% of all parks are woodland.
Wow.
It's just that the Serengeti itself is just full of these big grassy plains and these kopjes. It's all sort of volcanic output that created the environment. And that's created the perfect atmosphere for these massive herds to move.
Yeah.
And that by itself is interesting. So again, being in the Serengeti, there are pockets of sedentary wildlife with a totally different pattern. So there are wildebeest that stay put in a few spots outside the migration, and they have a totally different pattern of life. They drop their young in December, not in January or February. And the vast numbers come about because you have a microclimate which they follow, so they get fresh, amazing grass.
Yeah.
And the net effect of the fresh, amazing grass versus the extra energy to get to that grass is a positive one. So that's why you get these incredible numbers.
I know I keep saying how amazing it is, but just to be able to be in the middle of these wild areas and, like you said, all the different landscapes within one country is just incredible.
That's the thing. If you go from Tarangire, which is the big river down the middle and some amazing elephant viewing, and then Manyara, then you drop in the crater, and of course all that brings with it a very intense game viewing. Obviously there's a lot of cars because it's a small space, but it's an incredible place to be in. And then the vastness of the Serengeti with the migration, from a Bush Rover, and then you come to the lakeshore, and then you're cruising around on little canoes on our waterways and out in the big community thing with the fishing village, which is a phenomenal thing to see, and cruising on the lake. I think by the time you finish that, you get your 12 out of 10. Sorry, not 14 out of 10.
12 out of 10. So, David, on this podcast, I always ask the same question to our guests. I think I know your answer. I think it's going to be Tanzania, but you might surprise me. So, where in the world has captured your heart the most?
Well, I'm going a bit more specific than that.
Okay.
There's a small lake in one of the parks in Tanzania called Lake Mzizimir, and it was where I spent my first week with Tara, my wife, 29 years ago now. And when I first met her, and we broke up 17 times after that before we finally got married. So, but going back to that time, and it's just a magic. It's a spot. It's the spot. It's the kind of spot where you put your ashes or whatever. It's that spot to me now.
Wow.
And it's a beautiful spot on a lake, totally cut off from everywhere else. You can only access it at a certain time of year through one way. And I went there, and I remember she was there, and when she left, of course I was sad and mooching around, and I even found a little hairband that she lost. It was sitting on a tree 2 weeks later. So it's kind of, that's my magic spot.
That is the place that captured your heart the
That's
most.
the part that captured the very place, the very millimetre that captured my heart.
That's probably the most sort of exact place that anyone's ever said, but I love it. And I'm sure Tara will love that too. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I think it's been just inspirational hearing your story, but as well as, the story of Tanzania and everything you do out there. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Next time we'll do it live from the Serengeti.
Absolutely, yes.
It's a date. Perfect.
Karibu sana.
Thank you, David.
Cheers.
We hope you've enjoyed the latest episode of Passepartout, People and Places. Look out for our next episode, where we'll be talking to more guests about the people and places that have inspired them the most. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please do get in touch. Thanks for listening.